Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for this International Maritime Rescue Federation webinar, one of our series of webinars that we hold from time to time on a search and rescue subject or subject area. Today's webinar is focused around aviation search and rescue in the maritime environment, primarily because the IMRF is looking to get more involved in the aviation side of maritime search and rescue. I'll come to that later in a presentation I will do. But as an introduction to this world, some of you are very familiar with it. Some of you may not be if you're just a maritime rescue boat operators or involved in the surface search and rescue world. Then this is a new paradigm for us all. Today, to begin with, we have a presentation on the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System by Scott Constable, who, as you can see there, is Principal Advisor Aviation Policy at AMSA, and I know that Scott has a lot of experience in RCC SAR coordination work, so he knows the business. He is a member of a number of international search and rescue working groups, principally the ICAO IMO joint SAR working group, and he's been a member for many years and a very valuable member, has made a very strong contribution to search and rescue around the world. So thank you very much, Scott, and thank you for those who've joined. Would you like to start your presentation, Scott?
Thanks, Rolly, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are situated in the world, to everybody. Rolly asked me to present on this particular topic. I've been involved in this since its conception in 2014, back when ICAO kicked it off just after the disappearance of MH370, that tragic event. And this system, the ICAO Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, was conceived and developed in the aftermath of that tragedy, but also taking lessons learned from other incidents such as Air France 447, another tragic loss of an aircraft I think it was about 6 years prior. So this presentation provides a broad overview of the GADSS and the status of implementation to date based on known information. There's an opportunity for questions at the end as well. And I'll just emphasise that it's based on known information because there are some developments that are still being finely tuned and tweaked as we speak. So as I mentioned in my opening, previous accidents highlighted the global air navigation system had some limitations. The GADSS concept of operations was developed by a multidisciplinary ICAO group in 2014 to 2015 to address those limitations. That document, if you're interested, is available on the ICAO website. The focus is on large commercial aeroplanes initially, and it's led to new ICAO standards and recommended practices. And for those that are familiar with the ICAO convention, there are 19 annexes, Annex 12 being for search and rescue. There's another annex, Annex 6, which covers in 3 parts the operation of aircraft. And Part 1 covers the standards and recommended practices globally for international commercial air transport aeroplanes. And the reason I've got aeroplanes in red, and I say aeroplanes, not aircraft, is because it applies to fixed wing aircraft and not rotary aircraft or helicopters. The main aim of the GADSS, which has a significant search and rescue component, is to provide the tools allowing more timely alerting and position information to assist search and rescue to rescue survivors. Another component of the GADSS, which I'll get into, is the recovery of accident investigation data in a more timely manner. The standards that ICAO has developed are not prescriptive. They're what are called performance-based standards. This has been deliberately done to encourage industry to develop different technological solutions. And the overall concept was developed over the short, medium and long terms in an evolutionary manner. I'll mention as well that although the focus is on large commercial aeroplanes initially, as with many things in aviation, the idea will be, and I hope this will occur, that it will filter down into the smaller aircraft fleet of the world, particularly in general aviation and helicopter area, which those of us in search and rescue know is the main domain in the aviation space for search and rescue. And there should be a lot of benefits out of it if it can be extended to those smaller aircraft types. So there's the high-level objectives of the GADSS, to ensure timely detection of aircraft in distress, so that search and rescue action can be timely initiated. There have been delays in the past for various reasons, and this aims to address that. It's to ensure that tracking of aircraft in distress is timely and accurate location of end of flight, so we can accurately know where to go for search and rescue. It should also help with efficient and effective SAR operations, and as I mentioned before, the aim is to ensure more timely retrieval and easier retrieval of flight recorder data for accident investigation. So that's a concept diagram which tries to encapsulate the components of the GADSS. You can see there at the top you've got an aircraft tracking component, which I'll discuss a bit further on, an autonomous distress tracking or ADT component, and a PFLR, which is the post-flight localization and recovery. That last part it's basically a joint search and rescue and accident investigation component. Those three components are enabled by an information management system, and then the alerts are sent to the search and rescue authorities and accident investigation authorities. I'll get to it later, but information can also be provided or will be provided to other stakeholders, such as the aircraft operator. So this slide here is basically an animation which is pretty rudimentary that I tried to develop to illustrate how it all works. So the first part you can see there is aircraft tracking, or AT, which provides for mandatory reports by aircraft at least every 15 minutes, and the rate can be increased if required. The second part in red, which is showing now hopefully, is the ADT, or autonomous distress tracking. So that is designed to activate automatically on detection of a distress condition, or it can be manually activated by the crew. It will trigger an initial notification and then position reports automatically at least every 1 minute. And then we get to the PFLR stage. The components of that include ADFR, and I apologise if there's acronyms here. There are too many acronyms, but ADFR is automatic deployable flight recorder. There's also the automatic emergency locator transmitter component, and there's also an underwater locator beacon component. And as the animation tries to illustrate there, it's applicable in either a ditching scenario or on land scenario. So the first component in a little bit more detail, the aircraft tracking part, this was identified early in the piece as low-hanging fruit. It was something that could be implemented in the short term to improve the tracking of aircraft using existing equipment and technology. Before aircraft tracking was mandated by ICAO, it became applicable on the 8th of November 2018. Most flights over oceanic areas were required to report their position to air traffic services, air traffic control, about every 30 to 40 minutes or more. and usually using HF radio. The pilots just made their routine scheduled reports, or by satellite-based communications. So there was the option to use both. Many large aeroplanes carried satellite systems with existing tracking capability, but some airlines chose not to enable those. They didn't have to. They chose not to enable those due to the associated cost and used HF radio instead. For those in the audience that understand radio communications and HF radio, especially over the oceanic areas, you will understand that HF radio has its limitations. It served us very well for many decades, and it still continues to be used, but you can get ionospheric conditions, etc., which limit communications and sometimes stop communications altogether. And I dare say at the moment, with the aurora borealis and aurora australis down my end of the world at the moment, with the solar flares occurring, I dare say there's probably been some HF fade out. Also, flights in oceanic areas are unable to be tracked, or were unable to be tracked, using traditional air traffic services radar surveillance, as that relied on ground-based terrestrial sites. And of course, over the oceans, you don't have that availability. So for the aircraft tracking mandate, as a first step, ICAO mandated that for larger aeroplanes, about 737, Boeing 737 size and above, flying over oceanic areas. And the aircraft operator shall track the position of their aeroplane using automated reporting at least every 15 minutes. So the frequency was upped, and there was one exception where flights were already being tracked by ATS surveillance at least every 15 minutes. The operator then did not have to do that. There are various aircraft tracking service providers now in use. The search and rescue benefits of that are, I guess, fairly obvious. Whereas you once had 30 to 40 minute or more intervals between reporting points, when an aircraft did not report, that was quite a long distance and quite a large search area. Of course, reducing it to 15 minutes or less reduced the search area. So it had benefits immediately for the search and rescue system. The second component, which is pretty much rolling out right now as we speak, is the autonomous distress tracking, or ADT, function. I'll emphasise this is not the same as aircraft tracking, which I just described. It is a common point of confusion in industry, but it is different to aircraft tracking, and I'll hopefully try to explain that now. ADT provides a new and more advanced form of alerting and flight tracking globally. It has been mandated initially by ICAO from the 1st of January 2023, and it's now been delayed for various reasons. But you can see there the standard is that it's mandatory as of the 1st of January next year for aircraft first issued with a certificate of airworthiness for the first time on or after the 1st of January this year. And that's for aircraft with maximum certificated takeoff mass of over 27 tonnes, which is about a Dash 8 Q400 size and above. There's also a recommended practice, so it's an optional thing, but for smaller aeroplanes above 5,700 kilos. So, and that came into effect from the 1st of January 2023, which includes Saab 340, smaller Dash 8s, etc. That sort of size and a bit smaller. So the ADT will automatically transmit aircraft position in flight at least every minute when the system detects an aircraft is in a distress condition, and that the aim of establishing the location of an accident site within a 6 nautical mile radius. There's a reason for the 6 mile radius, which I won't go into, but it's based on historical accident data. Example of system triggers include a sudden loss of altitude, a loss of all engine power, and there is controlled flight into terrain, attitude. They're the four main triggers, but there are optional triggers available depending on whether the manufacturer wants to include that. And that could include things like departure from the flight plan route, etc. The ADT unit is to be independently powered and not accessible to anyone on board the flight. It can be manually activated by pilots. However, the difference here is if it's manually activated, then it can be switched off manually. But if it's automatically triggered, it can only be silenced automatically. No one can turn it off. It can be silenced if it's triggered automatically if the aircraft returns to normal operations. There was the possibility, I'll go back, sorry. There was the possibility in the early concept of manually activating from a ground station. The technology exists to do that, but I understand it's still subject to debate about whether that's a good idea or not. So for ADT, ICAO has not specified any particular technical solution. As I said earlier, that's to allow industry to innovate and come up with any solution provided it meets the ICAO specifications. One solution that is now currently in operation is what's called the ELT-DT. As I mentioned earlier, and they've been around for years, for those in aviation and search and rescue community out there will understand what an ELT is, an emergency locator transmitter. And that device, there are variations on it, but essentially it's an aviation device that will activate either automatically or can be switched on manually. That will indicate a position and an aircraft is in distress. It'll be detected by the GADSS satellite distress system, the global system that's been in operation for many years, the same system that detects EPIRBs for the mariners out there, or personal locator beacons, PLBs. So the ELT-DT, DT standing for distress tracking, was a solution developed in the GADSS community to address the ADT requirement. There are other possible solutions, including technologies using space-based automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, or ADS-B, that is used in aviation. The way I like to describe it is it's very similar to maritime AIS system. And there's also an option of using real-time continuous satellite tracking for the entire flight. That's also an option that I've seen under development. So the operational process for ADT, there's to be no change to existing ICAO air traffic control and Rescue Coordination Centre coordination standards or procedures. Once the ADT is triggered, it's to send an automatic notification to the aircraft operator, the registered operator of that aircraft, the responsible air traffic control unit, the responsible RCC, and any other entity that a state authorises. The aircraft operator is then asked to validate the triggered event and report to, that's if it's possible, of course, and report the outcome to the responsible ATS unit. The ATS unit will then assess and declare an emergency phase as appropriate. And then the ATS unit, per standard procedures today, will notify the RCC responsible, including if it's assessed as a false activation. And that's how it's supposed to operate. And then, of course, the RCC will initiate a SAR response as appropriate. I mentioned there before the information system to enable ADT. And apologies again, another acronym here, the LADR, LADR. And this is an ICAO location of aircraft in distress repository. That is very close to being made operational. It's to manage the global ADT data, communications and storage. It's been workshopped. I've seen the prototype in action, and at the end of this presentation, I've got some slides of what it looks like, the prototype that is. It's being developed, and it's going to be hosted by Eurocontrol on behalf of ICAO. Aircraft operators will be responsible for making ADT data from their aircraft available to the ladder. Stakeholders such as RCCs, air traffic control units, etc., will need to subscribe to the ladder, and they'll have the option of an internet web browser secure access. There's also the plans for connection to existing search and rescue incident systems via an API, IT speak. A notification message will be sent to appropriate stakeholders when the ADT triggers. I'll emphasise it's a notification message, not an alert. At the moment, it'll initially go via email, but there are other plans, other methods planned. For example, the AFTN, or the Aeronautical Fixed Telecommunications Network, which has been used for decades throughout the world in the air traffic control world. But GADSS also uses it to deliver existing distress beacon alerts. When you receive the notification, stakeholders will then need to log into the ladder to access the ADT data, and viewing rights will be filtered. Operators are going to be able to see their own aircraft data, but they will not be able to see another operator's data. However, RCCs will be able to see all data. This is just a slide of the ladder data requirements. On the left, you can see the mandatory requirements of the type of data that will be available, and there's optional on the right. There is a document which is listed at the bottom of the slide, which is available. It's got a lot more on the functional specifications and so on. So essentially, latitude and longitude, aircraft identification. Examples can be the aircraft registration. It could be what's called the 24-bit address, which is used on multiple systems for aircraft and in the air traffic control world to uniquely identify a particular airframe. There's an option of using a cell call code. That's essentially a unique code assigned to an aircraft for HF usage, and it could be a flight call sign and number. You can see there in the table the other things. Altitude is a recommendation only. It could be in metres or feet. Of course, the system may be able to calculate a ground speed in knots or kilometres per hour. The ELT hex ID is another option, and for ELT DTs, I understand that's certainly going to be available as a means of identification. Okay, I think it's enough for that one there. So just to demonstrate here, this is a diagram which attempts to show the ADT notification pathway through the ladder as it's currently understood. So the ADT will transmit. The alert would go to a satellite, down to an earth station, the ADT service provider. It could possibly go via another terrestrial ground station, depending on the service provider. That information gets sent to the ladder, and then it gets distributed as a notification to the stakeholders, as I mentioned before. Now for the ELT DT, which will be on the next slide, slight difference. So there's still that requirement that I mentioned before for the information from an ELT DT to go to the ladder. However, GADSS will also deliver it via their existing MCC or COSPAS SARSET distress beacon network. And effectively, that's how it is supposed to work in black. Sorry, in the black there is how it's supposed to work. So the alert will come from the ELT-DT via the satellite to the ground earth station or the LUT, local user terminal, to the mission coordinate control centre. We'll then send it on to the ladder and then distribute it. That's what ICAO would like to see. What will occur as well is that the information will go to the MCC and via the red arrows will go to the SAR point of contact to the RCC as now for EPIRBs, PLBs and ELTs. I mentioned before that the ELT-DTs are now flying, are in operation, and there have been some activations. However, they've been false activations. Those alerts have been received via the COSPAS SARSAT system, not yet via the ladder system. Once the ladder system is in operation, which is not far away, I understand, then RCCs are going to get a notification via the ladder system, and they'll also get an alert via the COSPAS SARSAT system. So the status of ADT at the moment, as I mentioned, they're already fitted, and there's an increasing number of operational ELT-DTs entering the environment. COSPAS SARSAT MCCs, the mission control centres, are already receiving ELT-DT alerts. There is a high number of false alerts at the moment, which are thought to be associated with some mishandling, misunderstanding during testing and fitment. So the SAR community, the COSPAS SARSAT community as well, are investigating that to see what the issue is. In Australia, we have procedures in place for our JRCC Australia, and our regulator is currently developing regulations for aircraft. And the regulations side it varies state to state at the moment as to where they're at with the regulations. But having said that, of course, if a state does not yet have regulations, the international nature of aviation is that there'll be aircraft from another state entering your airspace or your SRR, which will have these devices fitted and will have regulations. So all RCCs globally need to be prepared now to handle any ELT-DT alerts that they receive. Now that's just a slide that Airbus had provided. It's an older one, and I assume it's still current. But that's the Airbus solution where they have the ELT-DT fitted. And the ELT-DT is the one that I understand that Airbus are fitting, is an integrated unit which will function both as an ADT device whilst the aircraft is in flight, and then it will also function post-flight or post-crash as an automatic ELT. So it'll do two things. The PFLR side, post-flight localization and recovery, the third function of the GADSS, it's to improve the ability to quickly retrieve accident investigation data, but it also provides enhancement to search and rescue, especially over maritime areas where the location and retrieval of submerged, the black boxes, the flight recorders and voice recorders is challenging. ICAO has already introduced standards to improve the ability to locate underwater locator beacons, and there are options being developed, including the automatic deployable flight recorder, which I'll show you a slide of in a moment. Another option being explored is the live streaming of data from an aircraft via satellite prior to an accident. So onto the ADFR I mentioned. It is designed to deploy automatically in case of significant structural deformation or water submersion. They're designed to float. The ADFR, this has been around for a long time, sometimes known as crash position indicators, been used in the military for many years, and also I understand in a number of offshore helicopter operations commercially. So this is just an extension of that technology. It's got a crash-protected memory module containing recorded cockpit voice and flight data. It also, importantly for search and rescue, has an integrated 406 ELT with a strobe light. And yeah, as I say there, it addresses a gap where ditched aircraft in the past have sunk with their black boxes and the fixed ELT. So the tracking of the floating ADFR ELT is also going to help RCCs calculate drifted search areas more accurately. Now that's a slide, again from Airbus, showing what the ADFR is all about. I have seen an actual picture of an Airbus with one fitted into the vertical stabiliser at the tail section. It fits flush and it's designed to eject. So the ladder I mentioned before, this is from the prototype. This is what the prototype looked like. I'm not sure yet what the operational system will look like. As you can see there, it'll come as an email to the registered stakeholder with that basic information. Basically, there's a notification. You now need to go in and have a look at what's available. And that was a prototype. When you log in, it'll present you with a map display with the flight information regions or search and rescue regions. I'm not sure what Eurocontrol has developed yet as to what the areas will be, but I understand it'll be flight information regions, which largely are coincident with aeronautical search and rescue regions, not necessarily maritime search and rescue regions. Long story, but ICAO and IMO, when they developed their aeronautical search and rescue regions and maritime search and rescue regions, they were developed independently. And so we have in the world today maritime and aviation search and rescue regions which don't necessarily align, which creates some interesting coordination issues. And just briefly, this is what's going to occur. You'll see an alert symbol. You can zoom in and you can see some aircraft track details. That's just a zooming in there to the sort of information that you will be able to see. You'll see the time of the position that was transmitted, the identification of the aircraft, etc. In the prototype, and there will be the option, I'm not sure whether the operational system will have this initially, but the idea is to expand its operation and expand the availability of data. And there you can see there was an example of space-based ADS-B from Aerion, which was imported for this trial of the prototype. But I understand that the ladder down the track could be expanded for other purposes, for other uses as well. The one component as well of the GADSS involved the ops control, what's called the ops control directory. In the early development of the concept, it was brought to ICAO's attention, shall we say, that there was no global database or accurate database with the details and the contact details, 24/7 details for global rescue coordination centres, or in fact air traffic control units. And also it is difficult for, especially for rescue coordination centres, to contact global aircraft operators. So the ops control directory has been developed, and at the moment it is to contain the 24/7 emergency contact details for air navigation service providers, which are essentially the air traffic control and air traffic services providers within states, but also the aircraft operators. There's going to be a module added shortly for rescue coordination centres as well. So rescue coordination centres around the world will be able to log into this secure directory and be able to find the appropriate contact details. I've been through that. And yes, I understand as well that to be able to log into the ladder, you'll first need to register within the Ops Control Directory. And ICAO has, or will be introducing shortly, some standards that require states to put this information into the Ops Control Directory. That's about it, Rolly. On to questions, if there are any, and hopefully that's what's required. We'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Scott. I hope I'm coming through correctly. Yes, thank you very much, Scott. That's very interesting. A very technical subject area. I'm not sure I mentioned at the beginning the reason for talking about aviation matters with maritime people is that aeroplanes end up in the sea, in the oceans. We know that. We've seen the spectacular incidents, the high-profile ones. But as Scott mentioned at the beginning, the majority of SAR response in aviation tends to be to general aviation aircraft. Small aircraft are more likely to get into trouble and end up in seas and oceans around the world, and that does happen quite frequently. So eventually this technology, as Scott suggested, may filter down into the small aircraft communities, just as Global Maritime Distress and Safety System was designed for big ships, commercial vessels. The technology has become miniaturized and become easier and less costly, and has permeated the whole sort of voluntary and non-commercial maritime world. So this technology will come into the SAR system at some point. So there is a couple of questions here, Scott. So one question is from Gregory Critchley saying, good morning, Scott. Are you able to provide any updates as to when RCCs, ATSUs and operators will be able to register on the ICAO Ops Directory?
Good morning, Greg. Hope you're doing well there in South Africa. No, I understand it's not far away. I don't have a date, but ICAO will be sending out a state letter explaining all of that very soon, I'm told. And I'm hoping within the next month or so. But I'm sorry, I don't have that information, Greg.
And for those that don't know, a state letter is it's a serious letter sent to the organisations in a state that are responsible for civil aviation. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, that's correct. It should come to the nominated state point of contact and then be distributed to whoever needs it, including RCCs.
Yeah. ICAO are very good at that, I must admit. They're very good with their admin. Another question from Dave Whidden, RNLI in the UK. Are there any plans that you're aware of to try and merge the maritime and aeronautical SAR regions? Yes, an old problem.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And as Rolly would know, it's been a subject of discussion within the ICAO-IMO Joint Working Group on Search and Rescue and other forums. This development of the ADT system in particular with Eurocontrol has really brought it to a head as well. And in the maritime world, I know there's an existing issue as well with IMO, if you're familiar with the GADSS, and where states input their maritime search and rescue coordinates with the introduction of the Iridium-based system, in addition to the Inmarsat system for maritime safety information. There's some issues there as well with trying to get that data input accurately by states. It's an ongoing battle. I don't believe there's any plans to try and align them, other than, from memory, Annex 12 and the Maritime SAR Convention both encourage states to make their aeronautical and maritime search and rescue regions coincident where possible. In Australia's case, we're fortunate that ours is almost fully aligned, but in many areas of the world it's not. And it's a difficult one, a very difficult one to sort out.
Yes, it is an ongoing problem. I am aware of, in my older life, and I think still currently, there are challenges where FIRs, Flight Information Region, do not align entirely with search and rescue regions. No one knows the reasons for that. It was just, I think I'll talk about it a little bit in my presentation, but in the past there was a separation between aviation and maritime. They didn't meet each other very often, and it took some time before there was convergence about this is a search and rescue, it's holistic, and we need to make sure these things are sorted out, and they're still being sorted out. Another question from, just a clarification request from Almar. Is an ELT-DT an ELT with a, sorry, tracking device? I think I can't read the, yeah. Let me just read that question again from the email, because it's clearer. Yes, is an ELT-DT an ELT with a DT feature? Is the 1215 homing available on ELT-DT?
Good question. Yes, ELT-DT will be connected to the aircraft's avionics and GNSS to provide the GNSS location. It will not transmit on 1215, the homing signal airborne. For the ELT-DTs, the integrated units, it will, once there's an impact with the surface of the Earth, then it will activate as an ELT and transmit as a normal ELT, as well as on 1215 homing signal.
Hope that answered your question, Almar. Another one from Anthony Evans. Thanks for the presentation. On the technical side, are ELT-DTs required to have continuing position data updates during normal flight? So in the case of controlled flight into terrain, the auto-ejecting unit doesn't have to determine its location prior to impacting. This assumes the aircraft has not determined a problem in flight and that would have otherwise triggered the ADT functionality.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't answer the specific technical side of that, other than the if it's functioning as an ADT, the ELT-DT as an ADT, then you will get a position at least every 1 minute. I understand it's going to be actually more frequent than that. Last known position prior to impact, if the ELT were not to function, the SAR services will have that. And hopefully it should also show a trajectory with the descent rate and so on, which will also help the SAR services to work out, if you extend that, where the point of impact may be, and obviously reduce the search area significantly.
So I've got a question on that, back of that, Scott. I may have misunderstood or not paid attention. So is the ELT-DT, does it contain its own GNSS receiver, or is it receiving data from the aircraft's GNSS system and then it ejected, it has the last position and then it can switch on its tracking device?
I'm not sure on that one, Rolly.
Okay.
It's either or both. Sorry, I can't answer that question.
That's okay. No, it's a very technical world. There's a lot of detail in SAR. I keep trying to tell people that. The people that don't understand SAR and think it's easy, they don't understand SAR properly, in my opinion. Another sort of comment here from someone, Arthur Barbier. He's an RCC officer, and he's mentioning that they've created, I guess this is a website called Global SAR Hub, and it represents all maritime and aeronautical zones with contact points for all centres around the world. It's available on globalsarhub.com. Thank you for that, Arthur. We also, there's the RCC Net I'm aware of as well as a website with global search and rescue regions displayed, and also contact information for places. I was using it the other day, and there are a number of RCCs around the world which have not provided their information, or the information cannot be obtained, so email contacts and even phone numbers in some cases. So the problem with these voluntary initiatives, which are all excellent, you know, people are wanting to solve a problem, is that there's always a problem of keeping them up to date. I guess the ops control website will still have that problem. There's going to be a day when a phone number's not correct, or an email may have changed, but it'll probably settle down. Maybe if it's official ICAO, then ICAO will mandate that these things are kept up to date.
Yeah, I think you're pretty spot on there, Rolly. And the ICAO Ops Control database, I think is, and with the ICAO mandating that thou shalt keep that information up to date, I think is an attempt to improve that situation. The two websites you mentioned I am familiar with, and yes, I've used them as well in the past to help out, but I think you're right on that being voluntary, you don't know how accurate the information is. Is it the maritime? Is it the aviation SRR contacts? Are the boundaries correct? All that sort of thing, because they do change. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Scott mentioned GADSS, whatever you want to call it. I forget what the GI stands for, but it's a global information system, shipping information system, and within that, there's a number of subject areas. But one of them is the global index of search and rescue regions, and there is still an ongoing problem with IMO having states keep that correctly up to date because of the way partly the website works. You have to input the coordinates in certain ways, and I think there's a limit to the number of coordinates you can put in as well. So there are challenges, always challenges with getting this right. And we are talking about a global system, so we have many countries with SRRs which we're trying to keep up to date. Question from Major Bhaskaran, probably a little bit wide-ranging, but I suggest he's asking, can you share your experiences on the search for MH370? But that's probably a 1 hour presentation in its own right, Scott. I know that because I've heard one from you. I suppose the question might be, can you see some significant changes to what was learnt about an MH370? Is this going to really solve that problem?
Oh, well, we certainly hope so, and that's the main reason for the GADSS to address that issue. However, aviation industry being the way it is, it's only applicable to new aircraft, as I mentioned, newly certified aircraft. So older aircraft fleet is going to take some time for that to roll through. Operators may decide to retrofit, but they do not have to retrofit. That's an optional thing. So it's a means of addressing that existing problem, but it's going to take some time to filter through, as occurs in the maritime industry.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's something for SAR personnel to remember, is that this is not going to be every aircraft has this technology. You may discover it's an airline that's older and is not yet retrofitted, and you have an emergency that you're responding to, and the aircraft doesn't have this capability. So we may even be back to the MH370 problem. We hope not, but here's hoping. Another question from JRCC Sweden. Can you confirm that an ELTDT transmits on both 406 and 1215 when activated, and only on 406 when airborne? And is it possible to have a copy of the slideshow? For everyone's benefit, we are recording this, so if you are members, it will be available in the members area, and we'll talk to Scott about having the slides available as well. Back to the ELT question, Scott.
Yes, the question from JRCC Sweden, I think it was, is correct. The ELTDT airborne only on 406 megahertz on the COSPAS at 406.0 to 406.1, depending on the beacon type. No 1215. But when it activates on the ground, it'll function as a normal ELT on both 1215 and 406.
Okay. Okay, I'll just quickly look at my questions because as you were going along. Do you think there's a question about the ladder, Scott? Do you think there's any concerns about the fact that you can have call signs or registrations or other aircraft identifiers? I suppose the hex ID or the unique address of the aircraft will never change, even if it changes operator or changes state, registration state.
Yeah, well, Rolly, the other aspect of that is because the only technical solution offered at the moment is the ELTDT through the COSPAS SARSAT system, that device will be registered, or should be registered, in state or international distress beacon registers, as per EPIRBs, PLBs and ELTs. But then again, that relies on the operator keeping that up to date. And of course,
yes,
we have seen instances where ELTs, for example, are being switched between airframes, but the operator has not updated. And so the RCCs go and respond to an ELT incident, only to find it's not the same aircraft. But you could say, well, the SAR units are still going to respond regardless, but it does help, of course, to make sure that you know the identification, especially if there's a different type and there's a different number of people involved.
Yeah, there's an interesting, it's reminding me of an interesting psychological problem with SAR coordination in that I have seen it where some operators get obsessed by the identity and the type of vessel, for example, they are responding to, rather than the fact that you have a distress alert transmitting. So go, because it's a distress alert. We need to remember that. It doesn't really matter if there's an alert from a beacon, a device, then an aircraft is in trouble in this case, and we should take SAR action and worry about identifying the aircraft afterwards. Obviously, it matters size and number of people on board, whether it's cargo or passenger, but just go. Don't forget it's a distress call and it's a distress signal, and you must respond. Okay, another question here. Anthony Ivan from RCC New Zealand has been using Aerion locate services, ADSB, for some time, and it has positively transformed the SAR picture. Obviously, it is a part of the larger tool set. Given the majority of issues, as you rightly point out, occur in smaller aircraft, do you have a gut feeling for the time frame for this to filter down to smaller commercial aircraft? 5 years, 10 years, longer?
Good question. I don't know how long it'll be. I'd like to think within 5 years. Technology is marching along very quickly. I guess if there's a commercial side to it as well, then it may also be up to the states and regulators to see a benefit in it and maybe mandate it, for example. I don't know, Anthony. On the question of ADSB, and this comes up regularly, it's another point of confusion. ADSB is not by itself a ADT solution. Main reason is that it does not have its own independent power supply, and ADSB is not autonomous. So ADSB, space-based ADSB, could be used towards a technical solution, but a manufacturer would have to develop it in such a way that it meets the other criteria. And yes, you're right, the space-based ADSB is proving very, very beneficial. And in Australia at the moment, the federal government has a rebate scheme going where they're offering up to $5,000 to aircraft owners to fit it into the smaller aircraft.
Yeah, I was going to say, Scott, my experience of ADSB in the general aviation world is that the devices have shrunk. You can get a device that you could clip onto a parachutist now. ADSB has become that small and that available, and UK, Europe had a rebate scheme to encourage the fitting of portable ADSB devices to light aircraft, gliders, hang gliders, whatever, balloons, the whole gamut. So I think the advance of technology will see these things come out very quickly, because as soon as someone can make some money on this, the entrepreneurs will be very, very rapidly moving, I think. Another question there from Michael Ipich. Good day. I was last week on holiday, so joined that. Sorry. For Germany, I will evaluate the knowledge of the ARCC. Hope to find someone for the workshop. Sorry, I have to. Okay. Thank you, Michael. That wasn't actually a question, but there we are. Okay. All right. I think as Scott's at the other side of the world and it's evening for him, and he probably wants to, after a long working day, put his feet up and have a rest, hopefully. Thank you very much, Scott. That was really interesting. It's going to be fascinating to watch this roll out and to deal with the problems, because there will be ongoing issues to solve as always. But thank you very much for your presentation. Hang around, everybody, because I have a little presentation to extend this, because this is a webinar about the IMRF's move into the aviation world as well. If you want to stay around and listen, Scott, you're welcome. But if not, thank you again, and we'll meet somewhere soon.
Yeah, thanks, Riley. And I just wanted to re-emphasise on the maritime side of things that the GADSS and ADT, Maritime Rescue Coordination Centres, do have an important role to play here. I also understand that depending on the state, and what your arrangements are for SAR point of contact with COSPA SARSAT, that the alert may in fact go to the MRCC first. And so it's important that MRCCs have an established relationship with their counterpart air traffic control units. If you don't have one in place, I'd suggest you do that as quick as you can. And yeah, that's all I wanted to emphasise. And thank you again, Riley, for the opportunity, and hopefully it was beneficial.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'll just support Scott there. You know, maritime people, don't ignore this, because it's about understanding how the system works and how the devices work. So if you are in a SAR aircraft or a SAR surface craft and you are searching for, you're trying to locate persons, you're looking for the beacons, you need to know what to do. It's essentially an EPIRB, but you know, there may be procedures and processes to follow through. Okay, well, thanks to Scott. So I'm shifting over now to a little presentation from the IMRF on the development of a SAR aviation panel. So a new direction for the IMRF. And this slide, I added a few pictures of the past and the present, just to remind ourselves that aviation SAR has been around for some considerable time. Pretty much got very expanded greatly during the Second World War, with lots of aircrew going down in the sea, and there's a few pictures there of aviation SAR back in the day. But of course, it's advanced through the years, and helicopters have come on in leaps and bounds. SAR aircraft have increased in numbers, and we are also looking at the advent of drones, UAVs, whatever we want to call them, RPAs. The drone in SAR is probably coming. So the world is moving fast, and the IMRF perhaps didn't move that fast when it was developing its procedures and processes. So just a quick history, the IMRF is 100 years old this year. So we were formed, created, gathered in 1924 in London. The first meeting was where Count Kozo Yoshi, and I think he's just, if anyone can see my pointer, I think that might be Count Yoshi. I did look on the internet to see if I can find a picture, but couldn't find him. He was pretty much the instigator of this idea, suggested the formation of some form of international lifeboat organisation. And the main focus of the IMRF ever since has been on sharing information, knowledge, ideas about lifeboat designs, rescue boat designs and operations. Aviation in SAR back then was immature and relatively ineffective. There were probably a few flying boat incidents back in those days where passenger boats or military aircraft rescued some people, but it was not a system. It was not part of the SAR system. Just bear with me while I get my technology to work. The IMRF kind of exists for the discussion of ideas. So the International Lifeboat Congress, the IMRF, has the conversations and the discussions had in this organisation have led to improvements in design and equipment. For example, self-righting lifeboats, crew safety equipment, operational procedures, and the safety of lifeboat crews has increased dramatically. And since 1985, the IMRF is recognised as the representative NGO for search and rescue organisations at the IMO. So we are a voice for search and rescue. And we attend several SAR meetings and committees, and we are at IMO and also involved a little bit in ICAO with our engagement with the ICAO IMO SAR Joint Working Group. So the IMRF has thought about aviation. We need to draw in aviation into the International Maritime Rescue Federation, because aviation is a holistic process. So as I said, we had concentrated very much on surface craft operations, but maritime is SAR is a holistic system. We've got the MRCCs, and we do have some MRCC and RCC members in the IMRF. We have the GMDSS and system for communications and coordination. And we have the International Aviation and Maritime SAR Manual, which brings the aviation and maritime processes and the two organisations, ICAO and IMO, together. And we obviously rely enormously on ships and vessels at sea, rescue boats from shore, and SAR aircraft, normally based from shore, but sometimes aircraft carriers, of course, from some countries. So we have a system which the IMRF was only focused really on the RCCs and the rescue boats. So we had to think about this and decided it's time to move into the aviation world. So as the only international NGO with its primary mission as improving maritime SAR, we want to get more involvement in the aviation elements of SAR. We want to form an aviation panel of member organisations from the SAR aviation community and SAR companies and suppliers. So the IMRF does have members who are service providers, product providers to the SAR community, whether that be boats or aircraft. And the panel could be a mixture of all of those people. The general purpose of the panel would be to promote and support the concept of harmonised international standards and recommended practices. So we are a little bit looking at ICAO there, who use those words in very specific ways. For the provision of aviation SAR services, for those who operate aircraft for countries and provide the services, and for those who work with or task aviation SAR assets to improve maritime SAR response overall. So we're looking at the whole picture rather than just parts of it. And as I said earlier, back in the past, we had aviation SAR separate from maritime SAR, and they kind of often didn't speak with each other because often the SAR aviation side was run by military, and the maritime SAR side was run by civilians, and it was very difficult to cooperate. And people recognised there were reasons that we should cooperate, and that started to happen. But the world is changing. More and more search and rescue is being civilianised. It's being transferred from militaries to commercial operators. So the dynamics are changing, and the way things are done may be changing. Not in every country, but it is happening. And overall objectives will be to identify and address inconsistencies in aviation SAR safety and operational effectiveness, raise awareness of weaknesses in SAR aviation operations, procedures and processes and organisational structures, with a view to enhancing aviation SAR safety and the operational performance environment. So I am aware that one of my contacts on this matter has mentioned that we are still having, for example, incidents that occurred 40 or more years ago, and we're still having them. So the generational changes where people move in and out of the world of aviation and their knowledge goes with them is not necessarily remaining embedded and being used to modify procedures and processes and ensure that we learn those lessons. Obviously, aviation is very good at this overall in terms of learning how to do things, but SAR, and there is still some problems, and we're still relearning some old lessons. So the aviation panel would provide a forum for members to share their experiences of operating SAR aviation assets. As a global organisation, the IMRF has, we could argue, a unique position in that we can bring people together to do this. And we could identify and establish some basic principles as a foundation for safe and effective global practices. So there will be guidance and advice. We wouldn't be imposing standards, but there is a conversation going on in ICAO Europe as I speak to develop some guidance material for SAR aviation practices so that we could contribute to this harmonisation of global approach to the provision of SAR services. Provide information and knowledge to and from ARCCs and to develop global guidance for this role and share experiences, viewpoints and lessons. I'm interested in, there are 8 RCCs around the world, there are JRCCs. We probably should share information and knowledge about how we do things. I'm not sure at the moment if there is a central conversation point for this, but the concept of this aviation panel would be to bring in everyone involved in aviation SAR, not just aircraft operators, but the ARCCs and the MRCCs and rescue boat operations, because they all work with aircraft at some point. They all need to understand how these things work and know enough about each other to ensure that we work effectively. I remember experiences from my time on the front line where SAR aircraft did not do what they were asked to do, and we got confused about what the aircraft were saying to us or asking us or suggesting. So you have to have a better conversation, I think. And also provide SAR aviation information, knowledge and guidance to MRCCs and rescue boats and vessels who work with aviation assets. So as I said, we would like to create a forum for discussion and sharing of information and learning and offering improvements for people's procedures and processes, maybe for international procedures and processes. Other tasks would be to provide SAR aviation with education on the wider SAR system and its processes and procedures. So helicopters and aircraft crew are not all geniuses. Sorry out there if you are involved in that, but that's a gentle joke from me. But we all need to learn from each other about how things are done. Aircraft crew have their specific skills and knowledge, and they're designed to deliver a capability on scene, but the overall picture needs to be understood, and how SMC, SAR mission coordinators, develop search areas, and what the mission plan is, and what the aircraft's part in a bigger picture is often left out sometimes and not properly articulated. So learning from each other would be a good way to improve these things. Providing technical advice to the IMRF on matters under discussion at ICAO, IMO, SAR Joint Working Group, and the IMO Navigation, Communication and SAR Subcommittee, and other IMO and ICAO maritime-related SAR issues. So the organisation has a small number of people working for it. It has a large number of members who occasionally do work in their own countries or at international meetings, but we need expertise. So if there is a aviation matter being discussed, or something has aviation impacts, if IMO are suggesting something that would affect helicopter operations, for example, or aircraft operations, such as, for example, ships being powered by flying kites, I know that's a problem that's going to cause aviation issues, then we would like information from the expertise within the IMRF, the aviation expertise, to allow us to provide a well-rounded response and a very professional response to any problems and issues. Contribute to the development of international guidance and standards for aviation operations. So as I said, there is already work started in this area. And we could, where we have the meetings, we intend probably to have online panel meetings on a periodic basis. Those meetings would, for example, receive presentations and discuss training, procedures, processes, safety, human factors, competence and currency management and maintenance, regulations, technology, experiences and lessons. I think one of the most important things that we can all do is share experiences and lessons, and those experiences and lessons are being learnt every day. Right as we speak, there is a SAR operation going on that people will be learning something. They will think something didn't go well, or something went really well because they did a certain procedure or process or technology, or there is feedback, for example, into what Scott talked about this morning, the GADSS. As this starts to be used, and in many respects we hope GADSS is never used, because if flight safety could be 100%, that would be fantastic, but there will be glitches and problems with the system, and as the technology it becomes used by the smaller aircraft communities, those unfortunately have more accidents than commercial aircraft, passenger planes, so we need to be able to operate and use this technology. So lessons learned and experiences sharing, and to enable us to improve things, will be very important. And why the IMRF doing this? Well, we are a neutral place to discuss SAR issues. We have been for a long time. We are not under any government. We are not under any bigger organisation. We are a independent party. We're a voice for maritime SAR to international bodies and organisations. So we speak with IMO and to IMO, and we can also speak to ICAO. And if we have an aviation grouping, then we will clearly be able to speak more authoritatively to ICAO. We can operate as the Chatham House of Maritime SAR. So if you're not aware of the Chatham House, you heard the word Chatham House rule. It means anything that's said in a meeting, in a particular meeting that's declared so, will not be identified to a person or organisation. So we can openly discuss problems, and then we can take those problems to the other organisations and express them, but we would never identify who said the problem, who explained the problem. Provide a global forum to discuss SAR and how to improve and advance it. That's been the mission of the IMRF since its founding. And we welcome any organisation, company or government body that delivers or supports maritime SAR. So we have commercial organisations as members, we have volunteer lifeboat organisations, we have government bodies, we have Coast Guards as part of the IMRF. We want that big, wide conversation about search and rescue so that we can improve the whole system. So currently the first panel will be meeting on the 28th of May. The time is to be advised. That will probably be based on where people are in the world. If you're going to join us and we get a large number of people from Europe and North America, then we'll set the time zone in that area. If we get a large number of people in Australasia and Asia, then we'll set the time zone there. If we get a global response, it's going to be a challenge, and I'll try to work out a decent time that works for everybody. But we will possibly record the meeting, but we'll see what happens. But if you want to be part of this meeting, please get in touch. My email is there, r.mckie@imrf.org. I'll put my email into the chat, and you are very welcome to join us at that meeting. Please be advised, we obviously want people in the panel to be members of the IMRF. We'll consider people joining us and discussing for the first meeting, but we would like you to be members. It is a member-led organisation, and we can't just, we don't have a big budget, we can't fund large numbers of people who aren't members. So membership fees are not necessarily large, but please consider joining us if you wish to be part of this group. So that's the end of that little presentation and the whole event today. If there are any questions, I'll just have a look in the chat. I can get back to the chat. Okay. Okay. So Robert, point is in our organisations I've served in, they had aeronautical assets policy and HQ at SAR organisations, and any government or military parent authorities need to ensure integration and operational know-how for the marine and air. Yes, that's the whole point, Robert, is to create a sort of multi-service response. Mariners, we have aviators, and we have RCCs coordinating operations, and we want to encourage that integration, closer understanding, joint operations. It's very important, and I do sort of reflect on my past and knowing about situations where SAR aircraft did not do precisely what was expected, maybe because the information was badly provided to them or they misunderstood. Obviously, things have changed since the past. We now have tracking systems on many, so that the SAR coordinators can often see what the aircraft are doing and can very quickly intervene. But that's only useful perhaps in range of terrestrial signals. If you're going further offshore with an aircraft, maybe you won't see what's happening. And something else we need to remember, of course, is that SAR aircraft can only provide a response, certainly helicopters, maybe 100 to 150 miles, maybe a bit further out to sea. And there are huge areas of oceans of the world and seas of the world where SAR is delivered only by ships. So that issue needs to be remembered. But we do all work with SAR aircraft, and we do need to get better at it, I think. And that is the overall intention of the SAR aviation panel, is to work on that. And I have expressed some thoughts here about what the panel could do. There may be some other good ideas about what the panel might be good for and what it could do. We do have a short list of things the panel could work on already. So we have a small shopping list of items that the panel could look into, and we have an agenda roughed out. But with the first meeting will be to discuss, so what is this SAR panel for? Are the ideas we have currently correct, or is there something else we should be doing? And we want, as we said, we want to bring the aviation community into the IMRF more fully, so that it is the International Maritime Rescue Federation and not just the International Maritime Lifeboat Rescue Federation. Okay, I can't see any other questions. Oh, hang on a moment. Andrew Farry. In some places, civil crews from volunteer organisations are responsible for aeronautical first response. In case of an incident, it would be great to figure out in a specific way what tools are used to this matter. Yes, Yes, good point, Andrew. That's one of the questions we could ask. That's the direction of travel, really. And I can't see Sweden's question because I've got a new message hovering over it about the discussion of maritime and aviation differences. Oh, yeah, hold on a moment. Where are we? About the discussion of maritime and aviation differences, integrated JRCCs are a good way forward. Yes, I think they are. Those countries that have JRCCs probably find they work much better together, particularly when they're in the same room or even around the same desks. That's the way to operate. We could. I remember my time in RCCs. It was very important to be sitting near people and hearing what was going on and talking to them about what has just happened or what has just been said, and not having to pass that by telephone line or email or some other means and misinterpreting what was said. Margaret Mentz has put my email in there for those that wish to contact, so thank you very much, Margaret. Conrad, is the membership for a person or an organisation? Good point, Conrad. I guess we're thinking organisations here because we want a representative from an organisation. I guess it wouldn't be good if the organisation had appointed someone and then a private member of the IMRF, because you can join as an individual, the IMRF. It's not well known, but you can buy an individual membership as a private citizen and support the IMRF, but that maybe doesn't confer such extensive privileges on you. So mainly for an organisation. Okay, we have different options. Yes, so Margaret's put a link there about the membership options for the IMRF. That is being reviewed, by the way. Unfortunately, times move on and prices and costs go up, so we do have to review it. Thank you, Allard. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining. Appreciate your attendance. I'll be in touch, by the way. Okay, I think that looks like the end of the question. So thank you all for joining. Thank you to those who stayed till the very end. I hope you found it interesting. If you have any thoughts about the presentation or comments to make or ideas, send them to us. If you're willing to do that, more than happy. And we look forward to some of you joining us. If we get 60 or 70 wanting to join the panel, it's going to be an interesting discussion, but we'll see how it goes. So thank you very much again, and keep your eyes out for future IMRF webinars. And if you're a member, don't forget the Global Maritime SAR Forum meetings we have roughly monthly to talk about SAR in more detail. So thank you very much. Hope you have a good day, evening or afternoon.